Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the series where I spontaneously respond to the prompts you submit. This one is from EyePatchNotes, hope you'll enjoy listening. It's about the interesting mechanics, kind of an understatement, fascinating, weird combo and tag system, build system in this game we're going to talk about, even though the rest of the game, well, we just won't discuss for most of this Parley. Your title, not mine, EyePatchNotes. You begin. Toram Online is the name of this game. Toram, Toram Online. Has a wide variety of learnable skills, characterized not by class, but by weapon type. Some skills may need a bow to be used, but there are no stat minimums or requirements beyond that held weapon. You have to have a bow equipped. Indeed, players are expected to kind of shop around for skills that suit their needs for the proration system, which we'll talk about later, and this Parley's topic, the vaunted combo system. One of Toram's main grabs for EyePatchNotes are the customizable, programming-like combo mechanics. A combo consists of at least 2 skills and combo tags. Here is what a completed combo looks like, though the interface here is set to Sword Tempest, the second to last ability in this combo. You can see all the abilities and then the smaller icon, the little tags next to them. To be clear, these are player-created macros, kind of, in the game interface. The player can select skills, a list of skills, and then apply tags as a bonus to all of the skills except the first one, the opener for the combo. To sample some of the options available, give you an idea of what some of those tags were. The save tag banks the tagged skill's mana for future use, but reduces its damage by 80% and reduces the damage of the next few skills by a little bit as well. So to be clear, if an ability costs 400 mana and you put the save tag on it, you pay 0 mana, and you can kind of absorb 400 mana worth of skill cost going forward, but in exchange you reduce that skill's damage and some subsequent skills damage by quite a bit. 80, 60, 40, 20% damage reduction. So it not only makes the skill free, it basically gives you the mana from the skill as long as you spend it in the combo. If you don't, then you have to pay it at the end. The Swift tag, 1.5 times animation speed for the tagged skill. There's some general good stuffy ones in here too. You can change the speed that you execute the combo. We'll get into that in a minute. The Reflection tag, this is interesting. So it reduces the mana cost if the player does not take damage during the tagged skill's animation, but if they do take damage during the tagged skill's animation, they do a retaliate attack. So it's kind of like a counter, but if the counter doesn't trigger, you're ready for the enemy to hit you. If they do, then you attack back, but if it doesn't trigger, then you get mana. And Consecutive is another example we'll do for now. This reduces the tagged skill's mana cost by 100 mana times the length of the combo. So if you put the Consecutive tag on the 6th skill in a combo chain there at the end, then it would reduce that skill's cost by 600 or 500. I'm not totally clear, but you get the idea, the longer the combo. So already we have a few incentives for why do you want to make skills into a combo. There are a few weirder ones I want to talk about later that are just things I have been thinking of because I find the system fascinating. Having not played this game at all, it's like, that's wild, that sounds cool. But why do you want skills to be in a combo? After all, as we'll get into, when you execute a combo, you are kind of animation locked for all of the animations of all of the skills in the combo. This could become quite long, potentially. So why put skills in combos? Well, the first one is that there is a convenience factor. If you would always want to use a skill right before another skill, you don't have to press them separately. The game has a very front-facing interface to build that yourself, and you would want to use some skills pretty much every time before using other skills. We'll get to why in a minute with proration. But the other thing is that you get the tags as a reward, basically. If you queue up skills in a row into a combo, well, you get the tags as like a bonus for having made the combo. And a long combo, yeah, that could be a very long animation lock, but some of the tags either explicitly reward combo length, like the Consecutive tag, you reduce the mana cost by more the further in the combo it is, or implicitly reward combo length, like the save tag. You probably want to save an expensive mana cost skill and then make the combo long so that the damage reduction penalty of the save tag has worn off by the time you do some big skill. Pretty cool. A very interesting little system. Okay, EyePatchNotes continues. So now you understand what the combo system is. Each learned skill can possibly be a combo opener. Not everything can be a combo opener. Therefore, each new skill that the player acquires represents a unique programmable combo sequence. Here's an example of a combo, not the one you saw on the screen before. This is a smaller one. We open with Backstep, which is 100 mana. Then Warcry with the save tag, which costs 300 mana normally. Gladiate with the reflection tag, which costs 0 normally, and Sword Tempest with the swift tag, which costs 400 mana normally. Backstep is 100 mana. Warcry is 300 mana, but costs nothing because it has the save tag. 80% damage reduction for that, 60 and 40% reduction for the next two. We have 300 mana to spend. Gladiate costs 0 mana already, and it has the reflection tag, so if you don't get hit during it, then that's 100 mana back. And then Sword Tempest, which is 400 mana. This is either completely or almost completely eaten, the mana cost, by the save tag. And then if the reflection tag triggered, then you pay no mana for this. The whole combo comes out to only 100 mana at the end, even though there's a 300 mana and a 400 mana skill in the combo, because the tag system is kind of crazy. Although in this case, you reduced Sword Tempest's damage by 40%, though it was almost completely free to cast, so maybe that is an acceptable loss, you can imagine. Backstep, as the opener here, cannot be tagged, but all other skills in the combo can be. Just breaking it down as a recap, because I know for many people, the abstract thinking required by this parlay will be so unmanageable that they've already clicked off by now. So let's at least try rehashing it again. Here, Warcry with the save tag is setting its cost to 0, creating 300 mana bank that the other skills pull from instead of the player's actual mana bar. A 0 mana skill is used next, so Sword Tempest uses the full 300 mana bank to reduce its cost from 400 to 100. Note that while the consecutive tag could be used to reduce Sword Tempest to 100 mana instead, having used the save tag 2 skills earlier frees up Sword Tempest's own combo tag slot. The combo demoed here, one of your actual in-game combos, would much rather use the swift tag because Sword Tempest is kinda slow. Right, and this combo isn't boosting its damage, it's actually lowering it a little bit. So you would like it if it executed faster in exchange. Pretty cool. Great example. Recapping its whirlwind introduction in Crew Parlay, yes, you brought this up for the previous Crew Parlay, which is an awesome response to that subject. Torum has the blessed/cursed proration system. This is weird, and one of the incentives for using the combo system. There are 3 types of damage in this game, between physical, magic, and the third damage type is called normal. Please leave me alone. I did not make this game. That's silly and annoying, and that it shouldn't be called normal. Whatever. Hitting an enemy with the same damage type over and over will reduce the damage inflicted. The enemy's proration for that damage type goes down each time. Now, this mechanic isn't totally unheard of. In a lot of fighting games, you have something that people often call staling, which is really similar. Usually in fighting games, the way that works is that if you use the same move, in that case, the very same move, over and over again consecutively, it will get weaker and weaker, usually damage or like knockback or something, or those are the same thing in the case of Smash, for example. In this case, the staling, basically a mechanic like staling, the proration system, does something very similar, but for broad damage types. If you do physical, 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 you're doing less and less damage, even if it's the same attack. Where things get weird is that the proration system also makes it so that at the same time, the enemy's proration damage reduction, damage coefficient, to the other damage types goes up. They take more damage from damage types they have not taken recently. One of the game's core mechanics is having the player alternate damage types so their preferred skill hits harder. Sword Tempest is being used for this purpose in a lot of the examples we're going to use in this parlay. Sword Tempest from the Blade Tree inflicts magic proration. This is despite the Blade Tree being primarily physical. Or is it by design? Having native access to magic-like damage means that Blade users have a built-in setup tool for their big hits. Further still, Sword Tempest is an area of effect skill that suctions enemies together and scales with physical damage boosts. It just so happens to inflict magic proration as well. Just to clarify, my understanding anyway is that it doesn't specifically like only do magic proration. It's just that because it is a rapid hitting physical skill, it's been a while since you hit with a magic skill in terms of number of hits. And in Torum Online, that increases your magic damage. Again, what's a little weird here is that if you had staling in a fighting game, for example, and I'm hitting you with a move and you keep failing to dodge that move and I keep hitting you with it. Sorry for bullying you in this fighting game. I'm not good at fighting games, so don't worry. You would be, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm fine at some of them. Okay, whatever. If I use a different move in a game with staling, like that style of staling, where my moves get weaker if I hit with them over and over again, well, using a different move does make my damage with the move I want to do go up. The key differences are twofold. The first one is that, yeah, but using that one move over and over again, which reduced its damage, didn't make the move I'm going to use as a mix-up do more damage. It does its full damage, and mixing up made my, staled move do more damage again, sort of, but it can't increase its maximum damage, and it doesn't increase the damage of the move that isn't staled. If you mix up a variety of attacks or spam a type of attack in pretty much all fighting games, you don't increase the damage of other attacks. It's just that, in practice, if you vary up your attacks, that will do more damage, but it won't do more damage than it would have if you had just done a variety of attacks. You see what I mean? In Torum Online, it does do more damage to spam one type of attack and then do another type of attack. That will do explicitly more damage than you would have done if you had just done a bunch of that good type of attack. So especially because they're for broad damage categories, that basically all but assures this is true. Because it's not just like this one move being spammed stales, but then other moves do more damage. It's all physical abilities stale together, but then also like anti-stale all magic abilities, for example, is really why this system encourages what it does. It puts you in a position where you actually want to go out of your way to purposefully stale an attack just so you have anti-staled the attack you actually want to do a lot of the time. You can see when I put it that way that this is a system that heavily rewards using a combo-like system. And now, maybe looking at it in hindsight, you can see how it would actually be quite annoying to have a game like that that did not provide a convenient way for players to like staple two abilities together, right? If you didn't have the ability to macro something like this, with a system like proration where it would be highly advantageous to do so, it would be a massive pain in the ass to operate this game. And so in that basic way, you like are gonna make combos, and then they have tags as like a bonus, and to make it interesting to make longer combos. I think that's important as well. If you didn't do that, then I think a lot of simple applications of this system would be still good. You'd want to make combos for the convenience of using a rapid hitting skill that doesn't do much damage per hit, that isn't a damage type you built into, and then a single big hit from a damage type that you do want to do damage with, and that would like almost always do the best damage. You would rapidly prorate the damage type you actually want, staling the bejesus out of whatever other damage type that you're throwing away and don't care about, and then you do your big attack you wanted to do with a massive proration damage bonus. And being able to macro, basically just staple those two abilities together, would be very good. Now, the tag system significantly, I would say mostly, rewards longer combos than just two abilities, which I think gives this system the texture that makes it as interesting as it sounds to me like it is anyway. Having not played this game, if it weren't for your comments about the rest of this game, EyePatchNotes, I am rapidly wishing that I was playing this game, and I will have many more kind words for just this very specific part of this game, and none of the other parts during this parlay. Now, we'll get into one of those. There will be a complaint in this parlay, yes. There's a reason why that proration is not interesting and is instead a terrible idea in context, but we will talk about that later. And then the point with the blade tree having Sword Tempest, even though it's not actually that good for, like, your blade is going to do primarily physical damage. An ability that hits very rapidly for little bits of damage each hit is very bad in this game because of proration. You're doing a physical damage tree, and you have an ability, Sword Tempest, that does a ton of little hits of physical damage. Well, I mean, that's really bad, because or at least I think it does it as physical damage. I can't keep this straight, having not played this game, so whatever, you get the point. That wouldn't normally be good, but because the system wants you to kind of contrast damage types, that becomes interesting in a new way. If it is if Sword Tempest does magic damage, then the reason that's there is because that buffs your physical damage. If it does physical damage, the reason it would be there is that now a big hit of magic damage would be pretty good. You got good physical damage tools. Not necessarily good physical damage tools for doing damage, just good tools for dealing physical damage, which in Torum Online is a thing that you would want to do for a deranged variety of reasons, not just to do damage directly. Yeah, so that. It doesn't matter, and I will not be able to keep straight what type of damage these abilities do, because I have never played this game, and there's like 50 details in this parlay, so EyePatchNotes, forgive me. Anyway, layering the proration system with the combo system poses some interesting questions. If a character is specialized 10,000% for physical damage, their magic damage is nothing in comparison. They are still strongly nudged into including some magic or normal attack damage, whatever the hell normal attack damage is compared to physical and magic, through their build to keep their physical proration stat high. And that means using combo tags for something other than damage. And would you look at that? There are combo tags that do things other than damage. Does a Blade player tag Sword Tempest for save? 400 mana is a lot to bank for skills in the same combo. You could cast Sword Tempest with the save tag, doing very little damage, but it would have done very little damage anyway. Remember, save banks the mana. You basically cast the skill for free and you gain the mana for future combo skills. But it reduced the damage by a lot. Now, if you're using Sword Tempest for proration, you didn't care about the damage anyway. You likely don't even have good damage for that element. And you were probably just going to use that to increase your proration to a different type of damage, which is now even better because you have a ton of mana ready to do that other skill, and this did way worse damage, but it wasn't going to do good damage to begin with. Great. Should you tag Sword Tempest with Swift? Inflicting magic proration faster sounds nice, since this isn't the attack you actually want to do, and the animation is kind of slow. You could tag Sword Tempest with something else. The Invincible tag makes the caster invincible for the animation time of the skill, and the animation is kind of slow. And here is where it breaks wide open. Yeah, that critical threshold of modularity is passed at the exact moment that a quality of the skill, Sword Tempest in this case, is useful for multiple apples to oranges qualities. This is my theory of what makes something really feel like you're making a build rather than like there just are modular options, but there's really only one good way to use a thing. A lot of games have this dynamic where, yeah, there are lots of different options. There's different things you can do with the mechanics in the game. You can equip a variety of modifiers, literally mods, or just like buffs and stuff to your characters, but it doesn't really do anything you would want to do or that the game rewards to use that open-ended in theory system to do anything other than one specific thing in practice. So just as an example, I think Warframe is a good comparison point. You have a variety of skills, and they have a variety of stats that can be modified. In fact, on the surface, Warframe looks very similar to this. You can modify a skill's duration, its range, its strength, usually damage, or effectiveness, and it's, which one did I not say? Anyway, efficiency, cost, basically mana cost. Seems very similar. But because Warframe, a lot of things actually, and usually only uses these as like single qualities in a build. You know, a skill has, does have duration and range, but only really the range is key. It's like a debuff or something. You're making enemies take more damage. You don't need a lot of duration. As long as it has enough duration that it doesn't just end before you can shoot the enemies, and the enemies are evidently right there, that's why you're casting the skill, then it doesn't really matter that much what the duration is. It may matter what the efficiency is, but you're just going to want it to be lower to spam the skill. The strength may or may not matter, and then the range, like once you have enough range that you hit everything you can see, it sort of caps out. A lot of the time, either a Warframe's abilities are just straightforwardly blanket improved by most or all stats, or only one stat really matters for that Warframe, for most of their abilities. And as a result, I personally think that I bet the audience who plays Warframe is possibly divided on this subject. You might be remembering, if you've played Warframe, times when you built a skill by giving it like a negative stat or something, and that benefited you in some way. But I would ask you to think about how frequently that happens. Like, as a total of all of the skills in the game, how often is it that a Warframe has a meaningful amount of nuance in what stats you want to build for their powers? My experience personally, having made it my career to build basically everything in the games that I play, especially in Warframe over the years, is that this is not common. Most Warframes, it doesn't really make sense to try to build a given skill to be good in any way other than one way. There is one spread of stats that makes the skill better, and no other spread of stats makes the skill meaningfully better at anything else. You certainly don't transform the skill into something else any meaningful percentage of the time. And when you do, I often would argue that it's a little janky. Like, there are cases in Warframe where you kind of use stats in an unusual way and it does something good, but a lot of the time I feel like it's like not that good actually. It just, there is technically a use to doing it this way, or the reason it's good is arguably sort of an oversight. Like, it's not really a core mechanic of the game. In this game, however, that is the game. The build system is you read a skill's parameters and then you use the tags to harness their power for good or nega good and to turn them into different things. The fact that the cast time of Sword Tempest being long could be a bad thing you want to reduce, but can also be made into a good thing that you want to take advantage of, or just irrelevant potentially, is open-ended in a way that many games lack. Now, I'm not trying to pick on Warframe specifically, I just think it's a really close comparison point in that sense of like modifying, transforming an ability's stats. This is a game where it kind of feels like most of the abilities are sort of incomplete, and then you use the build system to make complete abilities. Just by the way, since this is hardly a recommendation of Toram Online, and actually I think it's probably time to get into a big negative before we continue any further. Since this isn't really a recommendation of this game, if that system sounds cool to you, and the idea of you kind of have to make good build pieces, you get a bunch of bad build pieces, and you have to construct good ones, in this case largely using the tags and combo system, you might really enjoy Inscription. Inscription is a game that I feel like does a lot of things well. I think a big highlight of Inscription is that it's a very well-rounded game, in my opinion. It's a game that has good, I think good, that's subjective, presentation, music and such, structure, pacing, story, but also has an interesting build system, and this is not common in my humble experience. Not so humble experience, but I hardly know every game. And I think it's a really good example of that concept as well. Inscription is a kind of deck builder, kind of a peculiar deck builder, where I would argue you basically everything is bad and you have to invent good things to win the run. Using the game's systems, largely the thing where you get to kind of splice a card's abilities onto another card. So often when you get a creature, whatever they're called in Inscription, a critter, you get a wolf or whatever, it might have good stats or it might have good abilities, it might have both. And usually these are irrelevant on their own. It's not in total a very good card by itself, but they can be harnessed as tools to construct cards that would be truly powerful, and then you might be able to win. Combining that with the fact that when you splice cards together, you consume them. And what you want to do in many deck builders is make your deck smaller so you draw your best cards. And splicing two cards together both removes a card from your deck and causes the remaining card in your deck to be stronger than it was, really compounding that effect. This really counters what I would refer to as the Slay the Spire effect, where it's largely always correct to just avoid getting cards unless they do exactly what you want to do. There are some nuances to that, but I think that Slay the Spire has a real problem with like the basics of the deck builder formula are like a little bit too much the only thing that is good to do. Like, it basically never makes sense to not do the basics. I feel like if you've played other deck builders, you have largely mastered Slay the Spire before playing it, or at least that was my experience. I played a lot of Slay the Spire and I am not a fan, and I played a lot of it because I wanted to learn what other people were playing a lot of, and I feel I have. Just to be clear, nobody knows all builds. I don't know, maybe there is a secret variety of playstyles in Slay the Spire, but when I've seen other people's playstyles, I have always felt like they essentially boiled down to a few approaches. And I think one of the reasons for that is that there isn't a way for Slay the Spire to escape. It hasn't done enough to counteract that feeling like in a deck builder, you just are going to want to minimize your deck unless something proves otherwise. And the effects that benefit you for not minimizing your deck are just not often strong enough, in my opinion, at least when I played it and when I saw other people playing it. By contrast, because the effect of combining two cards together in Inscription is so strong, you can afford to have that not happen that often, and it still makes a very big difference that you utilize it well, because it both increases the density of power in your deck and removes a card from your deck at the same time. And there are lots of other events, like the hunters at the campfire trying to eat one of your creatures, or you warm up a creature by the fire. That event, if you played Inscription, you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure if you play it, you will. I highly recommend that you play Inscription. That event is a really, really interesting conflict between, like, do you use this to delete a card from your deck, or do you use it to maximize the value of a card in your deck? Now you have to choose. And it's its own drawback sometimes in the splicing event, that you have to not choose. You must remove the card that you splice the ability onto. That's usually good, but sometimes a restriction. The game is very aware of that, and I think that is all the better for it. But again, that feeling like the pieces in the game are sort of, obviously they are usable on their own. And in Torum Online, I would imagine there are plenty of situations where you do want to quickly whip out a single ability. You're not just using combos all the time, I would imagine, because it's so powerful to just whip out a rapid hitting attack to prorate the enemy for the damage type you actually want to do. And then maybe you do a big combo to do a lot of that damage. But I think that the critical thing is that the pieces are, like, while they work, they are usable game pieces on their own. Both the abilities and the cards in Inscription are also modular sets of parameters that you can use, again, as a kind of programming language to create your own effects, which are meaningfully different than the sum of their parts, and will often use qualities of the constituents that you made them out of, the card or the ability. They will often use qualities of those constituent parts in ways that don't really have to do with the base ability. You have kind of transformed that into something else. It doesn't really mean the same thing it did before. A negative effect was positive. Something that was positive but in one way has become positive in a different way, or something like that. That open-endedness, I think, is kind of the critical threshold where it feels like a real build system. You really created something, rather than it being that eventually you realize there kind of wasn't that much of a choice, and the build system was just a very involved puzzle. Though I do think that there's a gray area between the two, sure. Pretty interesting build system and relationship to proration. Intermission time, little negative thing. We talked about proration as a mechanic. Now, as we've described, it is a very big influence on why you want to use combos in this game. And this really interesting tag and combo system relies very heavily on proration to be a thing that you kind of baseline want to do anyway, and then maybe you want to make longer combos. But the idea that you can staple abilities together and then you have one key that just makes you do both of them, although you're animation locked into a bunch of abilities at once. Proration is a really important part of this, right? The idea that, save as a tag would save you a ton of mana, but then also you lose damage on your next few attacks. Proration is kind of like the key to that puzzle. You can still get benefit out of using the save tag without a ludicrously long combo because of proration. You can be using the save tag on something that would prorate your next attack, then you wait a few moves for the save damage debuff to wear off, and then you do the big attack you wanted to do with the benefit of both the free mana and the proration bonus. It's very important to the game's combat loop. It's very important to the game's build system. It's arguable that this system isn't entirely usable without knowing about the proration mechanic, which is why it is my displeasure to inform you that, according to EyePatchNotes, although this is one of the game's core mechanics, in-game documentation, tutorials for proration, no, there are none. What is that? Can you eat it? Nope, doesn't have them. The game just doesn't tell you that that exists at all. Imagine this. If you try to play this game and experiment with combos, every single time every single solitary time that you use a damaging ability, it is likely to do different damage than you said it would. You will go insane from trying to get abilities to do amounts of damage they ought to do as the game prorates them wildly up and down. Let's just say the range of damage proration is pretty large. Like it will be a significant difference. It's not like you can just mix damage types up and not notice this. This is not an advanced mechanic. It seems to be a pretty core aspect of the game. I mean, just look at Sword Tempest. If you hit rapidly a bunch of times, and let's say each hit prorates your damage by 5%, doesn't sound like a lot, but every time you Sword Tempest, let's just make up the ability right now because I don't know what it is. You hit 10 times in 5 seconds with magic damage, let's say. That means that you reduce your magic damage when you cast Sword Tempest by 50% by the end of the ability, and let's just say that you increase your other damage types proration by that much, so 50%. It's an enormous difference. Just casting that one skill hilariously unbalances all the other abilities in the game if you don't know what proration is. Suddenly, series of abilities that would have made total sense will be nonsensically over and underpowered for a reason you won't know, because the game doesn't just have a pop-up appear that tells you that the mechanics are the mechanics. I do not fully understand this. I think it is worth a little brief interlude about this part of the game, because Torum Online seems to me to be a game that so pressures this type of design mistake. It's sort of shocking that this would not be in the game. I just want to emphasize something. We do all realize, like, the developers of this game could, quite literally on a coffee break, just put in a little flag that the first time the character opens the combo screen, a little window pops up that has the plain text that they type in plain English that just says, hey, when you do damage of one type, the enemy takes less damage of that type, and if you do another type of damage, your damage will have increased. This makes it good to mix up the types of damage you're doing. Okay, have fun, goodbye. That's it. That's all you have to do, and this goes away. I have played a lot of games that have like a mini version of this problem. I am now going to explain what I see as the reason why a lot of games do not explain the mini version of this problem. Understand, this in no way is a justification for not explaining this particular situation in Torum Online. I'm sorry, that's just kind of stupid. Like, they should just say it in the game. That's insane to not do that. I'm usually not so harsh about development stuff like this, but it's just too easy for too large of a benefit for it to be acceptable to not just say what the basic things in the game do. Okay, push your feelings down, push those feelings down. And in other games, sure. Yeah, I mean, they're thinking that players will be overwhelmed, right? And in a lot of games, these systems are designed not to be directly manipulated. They're also usually not as strong an effect as proration is in Torum Online. And as double-edged of an effect, you reduce one type of damage but increase another type of damage, that kind of thing. And so a lot of the time, the purpose of not explaining the system is that, yeah, advanced players might argue that it's valuable to know, but it arguably isn't necessary to know it, and it still provides benefits. I recall a discussion in Arknights. In Arknights, when you go into a mission and you fought an enemy before you play the mission, you can check the map layout and you can check a little roster of the enemies that will spawn. It's like a tower defense game, and you can see what, damage types and weaknesses and resistances the enemies that you're going to fight have. As you might expect. Great, that's good. The damage defenses in Arknights are not very complicated. Basically, it's like physical and magical damage resist. Now, those do work differently in a way that kind of matters, but we will gloss over for now. Just know that physical damage is a flat reduction to the damage you deal. So if an enemy has a lot of defense, like armor in Arknights, it does decrease their damage per hit from physical damage, but big hits of physical damage do still do most of their damage because this is a flat numerical reduction to damage taken. If you have 1,000 defense, you reduce physical hits by the number 1,000, not by a percent. Therefore, larger physical damage hits don't get reduced by as much of a percent of their total damage. Resistance, magical damage reduction in Arknights is a percent, so it works like that instead. A minor distinction, but it does matter, that is useful to know, and I don't believe the game tells you that anywhere ever. and it is very useful to know that very, very often. But you could argue that since a lot of damage in the game kind of defaults to physical, that is why they set it up that way. Because physical is the one you usually don't have a choice in your damage being. They gave you a little bit of a gimme, like if you do big physical damage, we're communicating to the player that this will be a generically strong attack, so it is a generically strong attack. Like, okay. But then for magic damage, as a bit more of a specialized type, it's a percent reduction. Okay. When you see the enemy's stats in the screen in Arknights, it tells you a letter grade that is how good the enemy's resistances are. A weaker enemy might have a D in physical defense and maybe like a C in magic defense. So they're a little bit more vulnerable to physical damage, but they don't have high defenses. A lot of enemies will have like an A in one defense stat and then like a C in another defense stat. And the game is communicating pretty clearly that it will be much more effective to use, magic damage against this enemy or whatever, right? There is an argument to be made, especially because of that way that physical damage calculates with a set number, that you want to know the number. Like an A or C or D physical resistance is not good enough. But I think you can see where I'm going with this, right? It's absolutely acceptable for the developer and some players to argue, as they do, that the grades are a good trade. They do sometimes reduce information for advanced players, but the game is built around the summarized level of information that the game gives you. At the very least, we would be willing to concede, I hope, you and I, that the developer has made a reasonable decision to summarize that information. It might be overwhelming for some players, and it is legitimately not useful very often to know the exact number. When it is, you can always look it up. It's the 21st century. It's not a core game mechanic to know the exact damage number that the enemy is dealing. That just isn't a core part of the gameplay loop. It seems to me in Torum Online that it really is, though. I think that the main thing we can discuss here is the degree to which these systems will push players' buttons and what effect it has on the game and the players of the game to create a system that has this much granularity to it. And I think one of those important effects, as my segue from that, what might have seemed like a big tangent, and I just thought it was interesting, about the result of not telling the player about proration. We're just going to assume that you know about it for now, but again, this is one of many reasons why I suspect this isn't all that great of an overall game by my reckoning. No offense at all, EyePatchNotes. I'm happy you played it because this system is cool to talk about, even though this build system is very cool. The reason I feel they're connected is that it's a matter of deciding how much the system is pressuring you to make something mathematically calculated to be good instead of just clever, I guess. And in a lot of these combos, I think you did a really good job demonstrating, even for those of us who have not played this game, that it is probably a very fun and useful system, even if you do not lab out on a calculator how much exact damage most combos gain you. In the first place, for many of the skills we're going to be discussing, or we have been discussing, it doesn't really matter that much exactly how effective they are, as long as they are a very extreme version of whatever they do. So Sword Tempest, for example. If the purpose of this skill is to provide something with a long cast time that costs a moderate amount of mana, that hits for magic damage a lot of times, thus prorating your physical damage to make it higher and letting physical damage players boost their, single hit damage, then as long as there aren't that many skills that do that specific combination of factors very closely, it's not like there's a skill right over there that also is a multi-hit magic skill that mostly specializes in prorating physical damage, but it does less hits, but it costs less mana and it happens faster. It's a little bit too close of a side grade. As long as that doesn't exist, for the most part, it's when this is a good fit for the scenario, it will be the only game in town and you will want to use it. I think that is good in this case because the tags allow you to so drastically transform the abilities. It's not like something is going to become the only good version of a certain effect and then you won't use anything else. Tags let you utilize those things in such open-ended ways. Another way to put it is, if Sword Tempest is really, really good at those qualities, but you can use tags to transform it into 3 unrecognizable abilities, you're basically not using the same ability every time anymore, right? It creates variety without you needing to learn a variety of other abilities, which is a total win-win. The player doesn't have to memorize more effects, but still gets the benefits of more effects. That's awesome. So in theory, this system is kind of a win-win-win in that regard. You get these like niche, very effective skills that are very likely to be really strong. They don't have extremely similar competition, hopefully anyway, combined with being able to drastically transform them so you can learn very few skills and get very many effects. Fantastic. And the player is constructing most of the like end pieces that they used. So when you make a combo, yes, these 6 skills are all things in the game, and those tags are all things in the game, but the player has largely invented each of those pieces. Like, you didn't really start with something that is equivalent to the Sword Tempest with save that you now have on. That is significantly different from the initial thing the game presented. It does something quite different. So yeah, I think that's really good. And so a result is there's like a difficulty thing I want to talk about, and then there's also like design space implications. Now, EyePatchNotes for this parlay, you left a lot of notes, and I tried to do this, and it was the single longest parlay I have ever done. Usually if they're getting way too long, I just abort, but I had to admit that I just can't fit almost all of that stuff into the parlay if I'm going to meaningfully talk about anything else. So forgive me, you actually did say this parlay is riskily dense, so I tried to hide everything extra in this side column. That was really insightful of you. Good job. I'm sorry that I'm skipping almost all of it, but I did do a version that was way too long that was about that, but it was bad and unfocused. So you did a good job focusing your parlay. I am going to talk about a few of those things now for the remainder of our time. The first one is basically design space opened up by the combo system. So the main thing I want to talk about is how you cannot have a combo start with a tag, and therefore switching between combos is something of a kind of open interaction point. And then you have some really cool examples of like emergent strategies that you can use with combos that I just have to include, even though it's going to stretch the time a little. So the first thing is that, well, if the first skill in a combo, so looking at this example, you can see here at the left side, a backstep or whatever that is, I'm not sure if that's backstep or not, that icon with the boot, I think that's a boot, at the beginning doesn't have a little tag next to it because it's the combo opener, which isn't allowed to have a tag. But some skills just have effects in this game, of course. And so, for example, there's something called Magic Impact. It's 200 mana with a range of 24 meters, and it activates almost instantly. It says, deal damage within 3 meters, knocking down enemies hit. Regardless of distance or enemies hit, halve the cost of the next skill. The point of this is, that doesn't matter when the skill is. Not the next skill in this combo, not the next skill that it's just the next skill no matter what that is. You can use this to, for example, like end a combo, and then the beginning of your next combo can start cheaper. Or you've got a very good example. Because the Magic Impact, I'm just going to read the 4 points you made, actually, because they're all good. Okay. Combo tags are only available from the second skill onward. I talked about that. The extreme example would be something like Magic Finale. This costs 1,600 magic. Casting Magic Impact into Magic Finale reduces the total cost to 1,000, 200 for Impact, and then 800 halved of 1,600 for Finale. Still expensive, but 600 mana is a lot to save. Max mana in this game is 2,000, so that's a lot. 600 is a lot. The save tag makes 400 cost skills free, so you can start with an opener, cast Magic Impact for 0 because it has the save tag, and the next skill is first halved to 200 and then uses the banked mana from the save tag. This is important. So the game sequences the halving of the mana cost and the banked mana from save in an advantageous way. If a skill costs, whatever it costs, the game will halve the cost first while the number is bigger, and then subtract a flat amount second when the number is smaller, which is better than if it subtracted the flat amount first and then you halved a smaller number, right? Just like multiplying a bigger number. Dividing the bigger number is better. You divide you remove more. So that's very good. The game treats it in an advantageous way. A subtly smart, behind the scenes like set of rules for how the combo tags work is really important here. So that's very cool. It lasts between combos, I talked about that, but leaning into that point, and the smite tag, 50% more damage for this skill, minus 50% more damage for the next skill. Or if it's the last skill in a combo, you double its mana cost. The Endeavoring player can make Magic Impact more expensive to force it to be a combo ender. You can do something like increasing its damage, but then increasing its mana cost to make sure you spend all the mana from the save tag, but then you have the Magic Impact cost reduction for the beginning of your next combo, like stuff like that. And then one of the drawbacks of the save tag being that you get a massive damage penalty, adding the idea that there are skills that don't primarily do damage, self-buffs or Magic Impact's cost reduction, can use this skill tag as a way to cheat both the mana cost and the damage penalty. Now, we have to talk about this, even though we sort of don't have time, so I am going to skim over a few things. I'm sorry, Sword Art Online anecdote, but I will summarize. There's this scene in Sword Art Online, I guess minor spoilers for Sword Art Online, where Kirito and Heathcliff are sparring, and Heathcliff is going to be revealed, spoiler alert for Sword Art Online, though I don't really recommend it, but it's a spoiler, so skip 30 seconds if you don't want to hear. Heathcliff will be revealed to be the creator of the game. So Kirito has this problem where if he uses the programmed in sword skills that execute like a series of attacks in a programmed order, well, Heathcliff programmed them all. That sort of isn't how the game flow, the workflow of making a game works, but whatever. He knows them or something, so he's going to be able to block them. Kirito, fortunately, has been studying the blade, and so he knows actual swordplay, but I mean, like, muscle memory still exists, too. And so one way or another, sword skills or by trying to use his normal techniques, he can only watch in horror as his body goes through the skill motions despite knowing better. At least part of my enjoying Torum combo system, EyePatchNotes says, is reminiscing on that scene. Don't judge me, no judgment, that's a cool way to describe it. The problem is, combos leave you stuck in the animation for a long time. So yes, you can make a long combo that chains into another combo with all these elaborate techniques, but it can leave you very vulnerable. There are kind of two cool exploits that you mentioned about this. The first one is if you end a combo with a skill or there is a point in a combo with a skill, with a mana cost that is not possible. So, for example, the smite tag gives 50% more damage to the skill. It's tagged and penalizes the next by 50%. A combo that ends with a smite tag, trying to cleverly dodge that penalty, would be uninteresting. Because if you didn't get any penalty for ending with the smite tag, it would become kind of a rote choice. A lot of the time you would just want to end with the smite tag. Instead, the game gives you a little whack on the wrist and doubles the cost of the skill, the mana cost instead. You don't reduce your damage, but there's still some penalty. Of course, the game is aware that you may have mana to spend because of the save tag being in the game, but find something to save to end the combo with. Now this leads to mana illegal combos, as EyePatchNotes calls them, which include a skill the character cannot possibly cast. So for example, Magic Finale from before, with its 1600 mana cost. When the absolute player maximum is 2000, well, you can see where this is going. Ending a combo with Magic Finale with the Smite tag will ask the player to spend 3200 mana, which almost certainly cannot be possible in the system. You might be able to do it with the save tag and some combination of other things, but if you can't pay for it, the combo is aborted and control is returned to the player. Including a mana illegal skill means that the player can ignore even the downside of Smite reducing the next skill's damage and its cast time by just kind of pausing or aborting the combo at that weird point. And of course, you can use Smite in an intentional way to make things cost more so that you spend all the mana from the save tag. And I'm sure the developer had that in mind. But it goes even further. There's the opportunity to do a range suspended combo, another name for EyePatchNotes. This takes advantage of combos casting skills back to back. If a player sequences a melee skill after a range skill, chances are that the player is not in range to actually use said melee skill. Backstep, which is a generic skill, doesn't require a specific weapon, can be used in the middle of a combo to interrupt the player For example, backstep, ranged attack, melee attack. You probably won't be in melee range when the melee attack goes off. The combo is actually still in progress, but suspended when this happens, giving the player control again until the melee skill has a target within range. You walk up to the enemy. From here, the player can walk into range to finish the combo normally, maybe dodge or something, or overwrite the end of the combo with another. You can do another skill to kind of cancel it. So again, these are both ways that you can have a big combo, but then have a way to kind of bail out a little bit. And the range suspended ones in particular allow you to create kind of forked combos a little bit. In the smite combo above, backstep is used as an opener to create distance. The two stand-in buffs are used. Flincher knife is a melee skill that is suspended due to backstep creating distance. Again, my example from before, you backstep, range attack or something, and then a melee attack. There's a good chance you would not be in melee range. If the player wanted to actually finish the combo, you can just do it. Sure, you can walk into melee range. But if you just wanted the buffs from the combo, or you need to avoid a big attack or something, you can abort the combo there, since it won't continue until you're in melee range, by just using any other skill. This lets you create these forks that are reminiscent of like fighting game combos, is what I thought of. It's interesting. This system allows you to create basically a big combo, again, like in some fighting games, that you would normally have to think and time to string together. This game isn't about that and turns that into kind of a build system. But a result of doing that is that it's harder to kind of fork and add variation to gameplay. Yeah, you'll make a variety of combos, but executing the same thing all the way through, it feels a little stiff maybe. But there are tactics you can use to interrupt, fork, branch off the combos, allowing you to make one build piece out of a bunch of pieces that were very, constituent party, like I was talking about before, that is itself kind of a piece of other actions as well. The combo itself is a sort of breakdown into its component partsable thing. And while speech is somewhat fleeing me at this particular overly stressed, there's too much in this parlay that I'm excited to discuss example, I think it's a very cool system. Like, it allows you a lot of different granular options. EyePatchNotes, I confess, I think that this parlay is maybe literally impossible to discuss meaningfully in like a parlay amount of time. So I did the best I could. I think the system is really cool, and I don't think that it would be meaningful to discuss it without some specific examples. But it isn't the specific examples aren't understandable without the previous part. So while I inserted what I could, I have a lot more to say about this parlay, but we just don't have time. We already went way over time. So I am going to stop here. But I would just like to say that I have a lot more to say about this. And I say that because you're a long-time parlay patron. If you are interested in talking about this more, so would I be. But I have to do something to try to make parlay reasonable sizes. And I've already failed at that in this one. So just to say I have a lot more to talk about. I'll just say a few of those things since we're here. I do think that the relationship between build systems and ergonomics is very interesting. This game kind of allows you to execute a sequence of actions in a non-physically tedious way. And then I was mentioning before how people who might not have wanted to or felt able to execute a series of combos in like a fighting game can kind of get a similar flavor to that with stopping combos in the middle with those advanced techniques you suggested. I think that's pretty cool. There's a question about whether the balance will hold up under the ability to do those things. Many times in this parlay, we've described a mechanic where I think it's a really good example of this idea. You can see that the developers were thinking about balance and made an interesting decision instead of letting it be trivialized. Smite is the big one. It would be pretty reductive to have a game where the 50% damage penalty on the next attack after the smite tag was avoidable by just putting it at the end of a combo. That would be bad, because even though it lets players feel clever, I guess, by putting it at the end, I'm not trying to be mean, but that's not that like extremely clever, and it would get old. It would become rote that you would just want to do that at the end of most combos. This system, where there's a different penalty, instead kind of one-ups the player a little bit. It says, yeah, that's smart, and you will avoid the damage penalty, but there are still some consequences. It's not just obviously the best decision every time. Or maybe it still is, but they at least made the effort. You see what I mean? If the point of the system is for there to be interesting branching choices, that is the right approach to development in general. Whether specifically that results in the game being more balanced, like, I have no way to know, of course, but I would predict that that is a sensible decision. It's a sensible kind of decision for the developer to make. One thing we didn't talk about here is the invincible tag, which gives you a chance to be invincible, going up to being guaranteed, but only in a very long combo. I think it's 5 or 6 is the minimum to get the invincibility guaranteed. So you have to make a very long combo. Those careful incentives to make long combos. Okay, that's very interesting. But I also think it's worth considering where this balance may flag or fall apart, or rather, I really don't have a way to know that. It would be interesting to talk about that more. I certainly have some thoughts. I think that a lot of games you can kind of map how far they thought the player would think ahead. And in this game, it would be interesting to know what you think of that. And talk about it a bit with other games. I feel like some games, it's like if the player never gets to the point where they realize the full scope of the game, then I guess it's fine. But at the same time, I sort of wish the game just was deep and we didn't have to be rightly worried most of the time that if you come to understand the game, it turns out it's actually a pretty shallow system, as I have felt maybe 75% of the time I've played video games in my entire life. I think that most existing build systems are actually just bad once you understand them. And most of the time it's just hard enough to understand them that I think a lot of people have like a fine time as long as they don't like it that much, basically, I think is the problem. They don't really work if the player actually enjoys them. Therefore, why not just take them out? This is a system that I would argue kind of deserves to exist. It's really cool, but as a kind of consequence, right, like how far does the balance go? Far enough that the player can really sink their teeth in without it breaking? It's hard to do. This is not meant to be a cold shoulder to the game dev industry, not like my snide comment about including a tutorial for the proration mechanic before, but that's just ridiculous. Like, it's hard to balance a game to kind of get ahead of the player like that. But I think that's an interesting aspect of game design that would affect this a lot, especially because there's significant rewards for going like a layer deeper. It reminds me a little bit of wave dashing in Smash Melee, which, well, by the letter of the law, an intended mechanic. That is, like, Sakurai knew about that and implemented it on purpose or whatever from a thing in a web forum. I would still argue there's I think a problem ultimately in Smash Melee that the game is meaningfully two different games depending on whether or not you can consistently wave dash. And while that isn't a problem in tournaments, everybody can. I do think that's like, there's stuff to discuss from a game design perspective about including something like that in a game, where there's basically a completely new game, but it requires doing something quite unrelated to what the game is if you don't know how to do that. That is weird, and I think has game design implications. That would be interesting. And then finally, a bit of a discussion about basically the thing I wanted to discuss is this idea that the rest of the game isn't, as you've recited it to us on the streams mostly, sort of pulling the weight that it seems like this build system is. Why is there such a relatively well-considered build system, but then like not that same attention elsewhere in the game? Even looking at something like the proration system not having anything as simple as a tutorial. The game doesn't even say that exists, it sounds like. You've told us. Again, maybe it does. I'm not assuming you're wrong or right. I'm just going to accept that. Let's just assume that it doesn't tell you. That would be bad. This isn't a critique of the actual developers of Torum Online. This is just a discussion about game design. I think that the thing that bothers me is that this system, if you think about it from a programming perspective, in a different way, I mean, it's very technically straightforward, right? A lot of these tags just take a variable that is already in one of the skills and then like multiply it or divide it or something and carry that forward as a simple like percentage multiplier for other abilities in the combo. From a technical perspective, like from coding it into the programming interface in the game perspective, it's not a very complicated system in that regard. And you can make rules for what makes systems like this good such that you could put it in a game that didn't, I don't know, like how you don't need to not put this in games that are well made in other ways. It doesn't really take the same type of development resources. So I'm very curious to talk more about that. But wow, we went big bongo overtime, but I had a big bongo amount of stuff to say. Thank you for this awesome parlay topic. Folks, if you want to get parlay like this, you can do that using a link in the description. We'd love to have you. And I'm looking forward to the next ones, probably some of which will be about this game.